He almost led me in an accident. And instead of, "I'm sorry," I got, "Can you not report it to the insurance company?" It was not the concussion that hurt me more, but his irresponsibility. "My name is Natalie, I'm 26 and I just got out of a 3-year relationship with a guy named Jake. A relationship that began with a late-night phone call full of charm and spontaneity, and ended with a lawsuit, a car accident, and the painful realization that I had spent far too long making excuses for someone else's emotional immaturity. At first, Jake was magnetic in that way certain people are when they know how to keep your attention just long enough to feel special. He was clever, unpredictable, always the loudest laugh in the room, the kind of man who made you feel like you were on an adventure just by standing next to him. And for a while that was enough. I mistook chaos for excitement, mistook inconsistency for depth, mistook his highs and lows for passion. But over time the cracks widened. The impulsiveness became recklessness, the jokes started to sting, and the adventure turned into a tightrope I was constantly balancing on, hoping he wouldn't snap under the weight of his own unresolved issues. And when everything finally imploded, it happened fast, messily, and in a way that left no more room for denial. My younger sister Maya, who's 24, is not only my closest confidant but truly my best friend. The kind of person who doesn't need to be loud or flashy to be deeply good. She's always been humble, steady, and kind, just trying to figure out where she fits in the world, especially when it came to her career. At the time, she was in one of those frustrating in-between phases after college, working a job that didn't even come close to matching what she dreamed her biology degree would open doors to. One afternoon, when Jake and I were lounging around high and half-tuned into a dumb movie, Maya called me. I answered and put her on speaker, mostly because my hands were full and I didn't think twice about it. She sounded tired, a little defeated, and just started venting in that raw, honest way she always does with me. She said she was working at a plasma donation center making $18 an hour, and that sometimes it felt like her degree was just a piece of paper. She wasn't dramatic, just disappointed, just trying to find her footing. I listened, nodded along, murmured support, but Jake was quiet. Too quiet. And something about the way he looked at the phone while she spoke didn't sit right with me even then. Jake took Maya's words personally in a way that completely blindsided me. As soon as the call ended, he sat up straighter, his eyes narrowed, and he muttered something about how she was clearly taking a jab at him, how she must have thought working in a pharmacy wasn't real science either. I tried to explain gently at first that Maya hadn't meant anything like that at all, that she was just venting about her own situation, not judging his. But he wouldn't hear it. He twisted her words into something they weren't, replayed the tone of her voice in his head like it was some coded insult, and kept circling back to the idea that she looked down on him. No matter how many times I told him she wasn't talking about him at all, he clung to the offense like it gave him purpose. It was unsettling, the way he couldn't let it go, like he needed someone to be against him, even if it was my little sister who had done nothing but speak honestly about her own disappointment. When I tried to arrange a casual meetup between Jake and my siblings before a concert we had tickets for in August, something about him shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. Normally, Jake was the kind of person who thrived in social settings, especially with new people. Relaxed, charming, always ready with a story or a sarcastic joke that made everyone laugh. But that afternoon, as we all sat down for lunch, he was oddly quiet. Not just reserved, but visibly tense, like he was forcing himself to be present while something else brewed beneath the surface. He barely made eye contact with Maya, and when my brother asked him a question about his work, he gave short, clipped answers that felt completely unlike him. I kept glancing at him across the table, waiting for his usual energy to kick in, but it never did. It was like he had put up a wall and no one, not even me, could get through it. The air was thick with awkwardness and I felt caught in the middle, unsure whether to smooth things over or call it out for what it was. Something wasn't right and I didn't know yet just how deep it went. After the concert, when we were back in the car and I was still riding the high of the night, Jake turned to me out of nowhere and said my brother was cool, laid back, easy to be around, but then added that Maya was on a yellow signal. I stared at him, confused, thinking he was joking, but he doubled down with this weird seriousness, like he had made some kind of internal security assessment. He started listing off random things she had said, innocent, completely normal phrases like, "Who has the tickets?" and "Where will you sit?" as if they were coded messages meant to challenge or irritate him. He said it with such conviction that I didn't even know how to respond at first. I blinked at him, trying to figure out if I'd missed something in her tone, but no, it was absurd. It wasn't what she said, it was that she had dared to speak at all in his presence without wrapping every word in praise or deference. His fixation on her, on the idea that she was some kind of subtle threat, was starting to feel unhinged. And for the first time I felt something colder settle into my chest. This wasn't insecurity anymore. It was something more calculated, more toxic, and it was aimed squarely at my sister. Later, after I pressed him about his bizarre attitude and how uncomfortable he'd made that day for everyone, Jake admitted something that made my stomach twist. He had lied. The reason he had acted so cold and judgmental wasn't because of anything my sister said at lunch or at the concert, but because he was still holding on to that phone call from March, the one where Maya had vented about her job. He told me almost proudly that this was all part of some plan to see how they really behaved, as if he had staged some kind of emotional sting operation on my own family without my knowledge. I stared at him, stunned, trying to understand how he could twist something so innocent into a reason to manipulate a family gathering. I felt sick and betrayed, not just because he had held on to something so trivial for so long, but because he had made himself the judge and jury over people he barely knew. It wasn't his decision to test them, to dissect their words, or to inject suspicion where there had never been any. That day wasn't supposed to be a trap, it was supposed to be about connection. And he had poisoned it without a second thought. We agreed, after a long and uncomfortable conversation filled with apologies I wasn't sure I believed, that Jake would talk to Maya directly at some point, just to clear the air and take responsibility for the tension he had created. There was no urgency in the plan, no specific timeline. We both knew it was delicate and I wanted to give Maya the space to feel ready too. But then, weeks later, completely out of the blue, Jake told me he was going to call her that night. He said it casually, like it was a perfectly normal thing, like it wasn't something that required care and intention. I felt a jolt of panic shoot through me. The thought of him calling her without context, without me there to mediate or protect the fragile line between civility and whatever resentment he still harbored, made my whole body tense. I didn't trust that he would be kind or even fair. I trusted that he wanted to be right. And the idea of him speaking to my sister while still carrying all that silent judgment made my heart race in the worst way. Maya was worried from the moment I told her Jake wanted to talk, not because she feared confrontation, but because she genuinely didn't understand what she had done wrong. She kept asking me if she'd said something off that day, if she'd come across as rude without realizing it, and the worst part was that she started second-guessing even her own expressions. She told me quietly that she was afraid even her face, just existing, just being herself, might be interpreted by Jake as aggressive, just like her colleagues used to do before they pushed her out of a job she loved. I knew exactly what she meant and it broke me. As a black woman, Maya has always walked into rooms already a few steps behind in people's eyes, always fighting to be seen as approachable, competent, calm, never too loud, never too assertive. And now, here she was, once again preparing herself for a conversation where her very presence might be dissected unfairly. I hated that she had to carry that weight, and I hated that someone I once loved was the one making her feel it. I tried to be the peacemaker, to sit between two people I cared about and somehow smooth over the tension without choosing sides, but it all came out wrong. I told Maya that Jake wanted to talk, that he was trying to make things right, and I thought I was being fair, thoughtful, neutral. But instead she started to cry, not loudly, just quietly, in that way she does when something hits her deeper than she's willing to admit. Through tears, she said it felt like I was taking his side, like I was validating his warped version of events just by giving him the space to explain himself. I apologized immediately, told her I never meant to make her feel that way, but inside, I felt this sinking weight settle in my chest. It shouldn't have been this complicated. It shouldn't have taken this much to defend someone who hadn't done anything wrong. I realized I was contorting myself to keep the peace in a situation where peace shouldn't have even needed negotiating. And in trying to make room for Jake, I had unknowingly pushed Maya to the edge of a conversation she never asked to be part of. They did talk in the end, and it was exactly what I had feared it would be, a complete disaster. Jake launched into this long, rambling explanation that sounded more like a defense than an apology, stumbling over his words as he tried to justify his feelings without ever truly acknowledging the damage he'd done. He picked apart Maya's tone, her phrasing, her intentions, as if he were dissecting an argument she never actually made. And when Maya, with all the grace and patience she could summon, offered a calm, thoughtful apology just to ease the tension, he dismissed it almost immediately, saying things like, "Well, if that's how you feel," and "I guess we just see things differently," as if her apology was a tactic, not an act of goodwill. When it was over, Maya pulled me aside and quietly asked that I never involve her in another conversation with him again. Her voice didn't shake, but I could feel how much effort it took for her to hold the disappointment back. She had shown up open-hearted, and he had met her with suspicion. That conversation didn't mend anything. It just confirmed what she had feared all along, that Jake wasn't looking for peace, just control. A few weeks after everything with Maya had come crashing down, Jake and I were driving home from dinner when he blew through a stop sign without even slowing down, and in a split second, we were hit hard from my side. The impact was jarring and disorienting, metal against metal, glass shattering in a burst of chaos, and for a moment all I could hear was ringing. I ended up with a concussion and a scattering of bruises and cuts along my shoulder and arm, nothing life-threatening, but enough to keep me in a haze for days. The police arrived quickly, took statements, and it didn't take long for them to determine that Jake was at fault. He hadn't seen the sign, hadn't paid attention, hadn't cared enough to check, and that moment of negligence landed directly on me. It felt metaphorical in the worst way, me once again bearing the consequences of his recklessness while he tried to explain his way out of it. Jake couldn't believe he was at fault, even after the police report clearly stated it. He stood there at the scene with this bewildered, defensive expression, arguing with the officer as if confusion alone could rewrite the facts. Later, when we were home and I was nursing a pounding headache and raw shoulder, he asked me not to file an insurance claim. He said it would wreck his premiums, that it would follow him around and cost him more in the long run. He promised to pay for everything himself, my medical bills, the damage to the car, anything I needed, but the way he said it made me feel like I was being asked to do him a favor for getting injured in his mess. At first, I agreed, mostly because I was tired and overwhelmed and just wanted everything to stop spinning. But the more I sat with it, the more it gnawed at me. It wasn't fair. I was the one who got hurt. I was the one left shaken and aching while he found a way to make even this about him. So one evening I finally told him. I said it calmly but firmly, that it wasn't okay, that I felt like I was paying the emotional price for something that was entirely his fault, and that I was done carrying the weight of his decisions. My emotional honesty, the moment I finally stood up and voiced how unfair it all felt, ended up turning against me in the most twisted way. Instead of hearing me, instead of acknowledging my pain or the simple truth that I had suffered because of his mistake, Jake immediately flipped the script. He told me I wasn't cooperating, that I was being difficult, that I was failing to consider how stressful this whole situation was for him. He actually said with a straight face that his feelings are valid too, as if that excused the fact that he had put me in a hospital and still hadn't taken any real responsibility. But in all of his words, his defensiveness, his frustration, his wounded ego, he never once said, "I'm sorry you got hurt because of me." Not once. That absence said more than any argument ever could. It told me exactly where I stood in his world. Our conversation shifted after that, no longer warm or intimate but cold, formal, like we were two co-workers stuck in an uncomfortable project we couldn't quit. Every word felt calculated, every exchange stripped of the softness we once shared, and yet neither of us said what we both clearly felt, that something fundamental had broken. So when Jake asked if we could talk one night, his voice stiff and unreadable, I braced myself for the end. I truly thought he was going to say it was over, that he was done. But instead, he sat me down and spent 2 exhausting hours picking apart my feelings, dissecting my pain like it was an equation he could solve if only I would just explain it the right way. He didn't want to understand me. He wanted to argue, to win, to prove that my hurt wasn't valid because it didn't make sense to him. And the longer he talked, the more hollow I felt. It wasn't a relationship anymore, it was a courtroom and I was always the one on trial. I said it quietly but with finality, enough. And then I left. I packed what was mine, took a breath that felt like it belonged to someone I hadn't been in a long time, and I walked away without looking back. It was my first serious relationship, my first real love, the kind that carves itself into your memories with both sweetness and pain. But I had finally come to understand that love isn't supposed to make you prove your worth over and over again, or make you fight for the right to feel. I am alive. I survived more than just an accident. I survived the slow erosion of my voice, my self-worth, and my softness. And now I deserve peace. I deserve quiet mornings that don't feel like negotiations. I deserve love that listens. I'm not bitter, just done. And in that ending, I found the beginning of myself again.